Firstly, thank you, Wayne, Sandia, Patrick, for joining me for this conversation. We've all known each other in some part for the last kind of 3-4 years. So it's great to kind of connect and have all three of you in the same virtual room. We're not quite in VR yet. We'll get there, but in the same room to have this conversation. Those that are joining and kind of rolling in, welcome. Thank you for joining. This is kind of the first, hopefully, of many webinars that we'll be putting on over here in the US for Brewer Morris. As an introduction, I lead Brewer Morris's in-house tax recruitment team here in the US. I've got a team of 14, work nationally. We work at all levels, from analyst all the way up to global head of tax. Patrick is the Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Patrick Stodell. I'm the head of tax of a pharmaceutical company called West Pharmaceutical Services. I'm relatively new in role. I've been head of tax here for about 8 months now.
Thank you. Wayne?
Hi, I'm Wayne Monfries. I am the Senior Vice President and Head of Global Tax for a small payment processor that you may have heard of, Visa, based here in the Bay. I also happen to be the International President for Tax Executives Institute this year. So that's keeping me slightly busy as well.
I'm sure. And last but certainly not least, Sandia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandia Idupuganti, and I'm the VP of Tax and Treasury for E2 Open LLC. And I am also a TEI member. I am the Senior Vice President for the Institute of TEI, supporting Wayne and our members.
Soon to be president. We're allowed to say that, right?
I will be Madam President starting July 1st for you, Jack.
Soon.
Yeah, so welcome. Thank you. To kind of cover the broad overview of what we're going to cover in this webinar today, we're going to go over kind of the speakers, where they're at, how they've got through their career, the changing of soft skills, the changing of kind of tax over the last 10, 15, 20 years as they've been through, key lessons that they've learned along the way, things that they've potentially messed up, how they've learned from those things, what they could maybe go back and change if they could do, and then kind of one key strength that they felt has elevated their career through and across the years as they've kind of gone through. So Patrick, you're kind of first up on the list in terms of introduction to yourself and your career, I guess, to date.
Yeah, sure. So first off, I'd just like to say how honored I am to be part of this discussion. I've been in corporate tax for about 18 years, and almost all of my career has been in-house. And so I think I feel like maybe I have a little bit of a non-traditional route to moving up the ranks. Throughout my career, I've seen most of my teammates spend a number of years in Big Four or possibly Big Law, and then make a transition at some point. And it was a little bit different for me. So I started at a relatively small regional accounting firm in the Bay Area. I was not able to get my foot in the door at a Big Four. I had good grades. I went to a great school, and it was a really tough economic recession when I graduated. So I did two and a half years at a regional accounting firm. And I tell you, I went through 4 years of night law school working full time, and that was a walk in the park compared to my 2.5 years in public accounting. I don't know how you people do it. So after 2.5 years, I got home one day and I went to monster.com, which will tell you how long ago this was. And one position came up for Levi Strauss. It was an analyst position. I applied, I got the job, and I showed up my first day of work. And it said, hey, you're our new state income tax analyst. And they brought out these huge state apportionment files. I didn't even know what apportionment was. So, for me, it was really about just getting my foot in the door and working your way up. And I think that worked out well for me. And I'll highlight through the discussion maybe a few things that helped me. So one was from a really early point in my career. I really tried to show management that I was super invested in the team and the mission. And I always looked at every opportunity I could have to show a value, and that I was investing in myself as well, to build my capabilities and my technical skills. And management saw that, and within a few years, I was invited to join the international team, which at Levi Strauss was where all the key issues were at the time. So I did that for 7 years, and then the head of tax at Levi's went to McKesson. Levi's was a $4 billion revenue year company. McKesson was like 180 billion in revenue. So like different order of magnitude. So I had the chance to move into a director of international tax planning role. I did that for 3 or 4 years. And then we did a big acquisition in Europe, and I had the opportunity to move myself, my family to England, where I was the head of UK and Irish tax for 3 years. I did that and then moved to Texas back. The headquarters had relocated, and I had been pushing to combine our transfer pricing and controversy functions. And so I got to take over those 2 functions. And then I added tax policy as well, with one last move to Washington, DC. I did that for about 3 years, and then moved to West Pharmaceutical Services about 8 months ago, where I'm now the head of tax, struggling through my first year end. So 3 companies, really 2 companies over 17 years, but a lot of movement within those companies, and very broad experience and lots of lessons learned, lots of mistakes, and hopefully we'll get into that in the discussion today. Thank you.
Any more relocations planned? Because
God, no. I think my wife will divorce me, summarily divorce me if I propose any more moves.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. Thank you, Patrick. Sandhya?
Yeah, like Patrick, I'm very happy to be here. So Jack and team, thank you for inviting me. Throughout my career, I have found mentoring or being a mentee is critical to success and understanding soft skills and how to develop them. But a little bit about myself. So I have 30 years of experience in tax. Like Patrick, I started in industry first. Finished my master's, started at a multinational, but in the state tax group of a company. And it was an awesome experience. The team was great. The leaders were great. I had just finished my master's, and the director called me into his office one day, and he said, you may have learned the Surly rules, but you may not have learned the Sally rules. And I started getting concerned because I was like, oh no, my education was lacking. What's going on? And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know what the Sally rules are. And he said, same as last year, do not follow them. So, throughout your career, you will have the opportunity for people to weigh in and give you feedback, whether it's good or bad. To me, the feedback that has always resonated the most is opportunities for changing, for growing, because I think that's where it doesn't matter what my perception of myself is. It is what the perception of your leaders, your colleagues, your team members are that is critical for growth, for advancement, for understanding the world around us. And so, after that, I went to public accounting because I found that I seek challenge. I'm a learner. It's critical to know yourself and what you're seeking. And what you're seeking can be different throughout stages of your life, especially your personal life. When I had my first child, I was in public accounting at that point. And back then, they didn't have the concept of work-life balance. There was no work-life balance. So I quit. But, I slowly went back in, and it was awesome. So my career is a series of either multinational companies or big 4 firms. And it's been great. What I have found is if challenge as I seek it is no longer there for me to seek, it doesn't always fall into your lap. You have to seek it. But if you seek it and it's not there, then it's time for you to move on. So understanding how to obtain your career objectives is important for us to feel satisfied and for us to really participate and weigh in and contribute to our company's success. So, again, look forward to sharing. Like I said, my challenges and how they have come through have really helped me grow. So I hope to share some of those with the participants today.
Obviously, thank you for that. And obviously, tagging on the treasury piece as you have done fairly
Yes,
recently
that's been an interesting role.
is
Yeah.
certainly a new challenge for you. And Wayne, finally, please.
Thanks, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's always a pleasure to share experiences. I think Sonia talked about mentorship, and I think mentorship is great because, frankly, when you're asked to mentor, you're just telling your story. So I'll start with that. I think you have to go back to how I got into tax. So I remember being in high school and good in math, like numbers, thinking about what I wanted to do, and I'd see my heroes, athletes, entertainers get in financial trouble or even criminal trouble because of their financial management. IRS, they owed taxes, they didn't pay taxes. And I said, well, I feel like I'm an honest person, good with numbers. Maybe that's a career I should look into. And so we had a career panel in high school, and I'm sitting at a table with like a 10 key and a big spreadsheet book, and like the most boring career fair that you'd ever do. But that's what I did, and I stuck with it. So I went off to school in DC, studied, and went into public accounting directly. Started like everyone else does in audit, but within a year and a half, found myself with the opportunity to move to the tax department. Started doing corporate tax because that's what you naturally do from the audit side. Did that for a couple years, and a partner with a portfolio of athletes and entertainers came to the firm. I got assigned to work with him, and there you go, 5 years out of college, was doing what I thought I always wanted to do, until you realize that that's not what you want to do. So I did that for a few years. Had some connections from the firm that had moved over to Mars at the time. And so I got an opportunity in Mars to go back to the New York area, work for them. I did that on the federal tax side and the state tax side. And then had another opportunity from a career connection at the firm when they were in Europe, and said, would you be interested in replacing me here in Europe? And I didn't have any international tax background, hadn't really traveled internationally, but went over, visited, and next thing you know, I was in the UK, based outside of London, responsible for regional taxes for Mars, and I did that for 5 years. And next thing you know, I became an international tax person. I will chalk some of that up to membership in TEI. When I went over there in '99, I joined TEI, and that helped transition me to an international tax person because I started meeting a lot of people doing what I was doing in that space. I did that for 5 years, like I said, and came back and was regional head of tax for the Americas, which included my old role of federal and state, but also, for Canada, North America, South America, and the like. Doing all that, then had the opportunity to lead international tax at Nike. And so living overseas made the world a lot smaller. So moving from the East Coast to the Pacific Northwest was easy then, although people would say, what are you doing? How'd you end up in Portland, Oregon? But it was Nike. When they call, you answer. And it had a great 10-year experience there. After 3 years, was promoted to chief tax officer and led their global tax practice in-house, and great experience doing that. But at some point you move on. I left there and moved to Chicago to be head of tax at TransUnion. Many of you know TransUnion from a credit reporting perspective. It's data management, data integrity, but had a couple years in Chicago, Midwest. So now I'm kind of bouncing around the world and the country. And then Visa called, much like Nike, when Visa calls, you answer the phone, and had an opportunity to come back to the West Coast. And here I am in the Bay as the head of tax at Visa. So a lot of movement like Patrick, but a lot of really great experiences, and I'm happy to share some lessons learned throughout this program.
Yeah, I mean, so no relocations planned from now? You've been everywhere, like Patrick.
No relocations planned because I plan to be at Visa. So we'll go with that.
That's the answer that the bosses will want to hear for sure. And continuing on the same kind of path, Wayne, what's kind of been the biggest change in soft skills for you over the years? and you know, the world has obviously evolved from when you first started. What's been the biggest kind of shift for you since the start of your career?
You know, I think these things are going to change as you get to different levels within your career. But remember, I started in public accounting, and the key there was to quote code section, to be that technical person, to be the smartest person in the room, and frankly, to make tax as complicated as possible. And because you wanted people to think you were smart and they didn't know tax, and you're there to save the day. As you journey along and get increasing responsibility and your constituency becomes non-tax, you must adapt, and you have to become what I call the translator. You need to take complex topics and make them easy to understand for the non-tax person, for the layman. When I became head of tax, or as I was going up through my career, ultimately, I told my team, if you're not talking within the department, like to non-tax people, you're not allowed to quote a code section. Like, you quote a code section to a non-tax person, eyes roll back and you've lost them. And so the key that I've learned for success is to be that translator, to make people or enable people to leave the conversation with an understanding of tax. Not that they have to do it, they're happy you're doing it, but they understand how it impacts them and how their data and inputs impact what you're trying to deliver. So becoming that translator has been key in moving through the ranks and becoming a tax leader.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure Patrick and Sandia will, and probably everyone on the call will vouch for that being a key soft skill that has certainly changed over the last definitely 5 years anyway, but probably 5-10 years for sure. Patrick, same question. What's changed for you?
So for me, it's the change has been dramatic. And you know, if we go back to the beginning of my story, I started off, I had just very little experience. I started at Levi's, state tax analyst, didn't know a damn thing about state income tax. And within a year or two, I've got my mentor. I was lucky enough to have a mentor at Levi's, Paul Smith, said, "Hey, come on to the international side." And great, that's a huge opportunity. I've got to prove that I'm worth it, and maybe a little bit of a chip on my shoulder because I didn't come from big law and I didn't come from the big four accounting firm, so I didn't have that pedigree. And so I wanted to prove myself so bad. And at the same time, I started night law school. So I was working very hard to work my way up at Levi's and learn, really complex new areas, really independently, while I'm doing night law school, which was 7 days a week for 4 years. And so I almost had this like trench mentality of, I am going to walk through every damn wall in my way and nobody's going to get in my way. And that's great. That's fantastic. Got me through night law school. It helped project my career as an individual contributor. And that same skill and that same drive was catastrophic for me trying to manage people, let alone manage, different teams and functions. And so it took me years. It took years for that to work through my system, and many, many failures of, really being a poor manager. But like Sandia said, and I guess we'll get to this at the end, like what's the secret thing? Like it's being able to accept and welcome adverse feedback and respond to it. And so fortunately, I'm good at that. And I love feedback, and I always take it to heart and think about it and reflect on it. And that helped me pivot and be open to new ways of thinking and new ways of approaching who I am as a professional and how I interact with the others around me.
Yeah, but I mean, for sure, you need to be a bit of a chameleon, don't you, when you're leading a team, not the shoe doesn't fit all kind of approach. What a hard approach with one person is going to work with another person. You need to go down the softer route. So
yeah, you just can't be a stress case, right? You have to, being a stress case can be helpful as an individual contributor, but if you're in a situation where you're so interacting with people, you need to be an effective people manager, and that is and can be a dramatically different skill set. And so that was, that adjustment, we could spend an hour on that, but that was the biggest change for me.
I think Jack is frozen.
Yeah, he is.
There we go. I'm back. Sorry, not sure what happened then. I just froze. Apologies.
You're so taken by Patrick's response.
Either that or he was taking a power
Shocked
nap.
me into being in another dimension slightly. Sandia, to kind of wrap
So,
up the question.
Patrick, it's interesting that you use the word pivot, because I was thinking about that word this morning as I was thinking about my goals for next year, Wayne, as TEI president. Pivot. I feel like sometimes as tax people, we don't pivot well or soon enough or broadly enough. And I would say, regardless of where you're at in your career, yes, I totally agree. I mean, being a technician, in whatever capability or aspect you can be is very important. But after that, like when we present to management, regardless of what level you're at, the three things to think there is their questions are going to be, what do you need? What does it mean to me in the company? And how much does it cost? Beyond that, I mean, it's great that you're this tax technician, but do they really care? They don't want to. And the more you make the other person feel like they don't understand what you're saying, the worse it's going to be for you. So I think that's the important aspect that we need to keep in mind. And this has happened regardless of what type of company. I've been at a Fortune 100 company where very established company really did things very well. But guess what? Tax was siloed. Nobody really talked to each other. And that's where you add to risk. And whether you're in public accounting or industry, because it's not just a skill set for people in industry. I used to be approached by consultants who didn't even understand the economics of my company that I was at. They would try to sell projects that didn't make sense for me, or without really understanding the broader landscape. So what I would say is, reach outside of your area, outside of yourself, try to understand the other person or the other company that you're interacting with, because I think that definitely helps to the conversation that you're trying to have.
For sure. I mean, the more knowledge you have on a business, especially if you're selling to one of the three of you, the more knowledge you have on the company and the group and the economics of it all, the easier that. It's not even a sell at that point. It's just informing you of what can be done better, essentially. So, yeah, no, for sure. Lessons learned the hard way. Now, this is always an interesting kind of topic to speak to people about. And Patrick, you have alluded to over the call so far that you've learned a couple of things the hard way. Would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, how much time do we have? So I think the number one thing I've learned the hard way is, so again, a younger individual, very driven, fire in my belly. I'm gonna move up and up and up. I'm gonna do law school in my spare time, right? Just super hardcore. And I got through it, and multiple promotions, fantastic. And I was cooked, burnt to a shred, right? I'd achieved everything and more that I wanted to at that stage in my life from a career perspective. And I was almost like empty inside, not to turn this into like a Dr. Phil type thing, but I didn't have any balance in my life. I didn't have any balance. And you can only get so far if you don't take care of yourself emotionally, physically. The well runs dry, and that impacts your work. That will impact your career trajectory. If you're burned to a crisp, you will not have the emotional and psychological wherewithal to support your teammates, to be a mentor, to give back. You're going to be fried. And so the lesson learned for me the hard way, especially when things didn't go. So sometimes you have failures in your career. Sometimes things go bad. And if you don't have balance in your life, and if you're not engaging in proper self-care, it hits so hard because you don't have the shock absorbers. So for me, it was about developing that more holistic view on what I bring to the office and what I bring and how I take care of myself. And doing that has tremendously helped me in my career. And so that is really the lack of taking care of myself, right? It made me unsustainable from the long term. And I had to learn that one the hard way.
Yeah, I think we can all speak to that, self-care it makes you a better person all round, not just a teammate, but, father, husband, wife, whatever.
It sounds so wishy-washy. It sounds really wishy-washy, but I can almost chart, on a, if we're looking at a chart here of my success managing teams and bigger teams and dealing with management, and my career trajectory with my focus on, taking care of myself mentally, emotionally, et cetera. It was highly correlated, and it took me a long damn time to learn that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I advocate for and I'm slightly different with tax with deadlines and such, but I advocate for my team to take a week every quarter to get out and recharge, refresh, because you don't want to be kind of recharging when you're at zero. You want to be recharging when you're at like 50-ish, 40, 50%. So you're coming back at 100 rather than coming back at 40, 50%. Is kind of our thought process on that. Wayne, I'm sure you've had some interesting things over the career.
Hey,
anything stands out?
I got my 35th reunion coming up. So yeah, there's a lot of things in the 35 years that I can talk to. I wasn't going to speak to the self-care piece. Patrick covered that well. I was going to speak to something else, but I think it's important to note in that time, when you talk about self-care, I did have a heart attack during my career. And I had to learn the hard way about self-care and owning my time, setting aside time to get healthy, to come back and to be the better me. And I didn't do that before. So you talk about learning it the hard way, Patrick, I learned it the hard way. But I think part of owning the narrative of your time, the thing I wanted to talk about is owning the narrative of your brand. And I think what I've learned along the way is you cannot lose the microphone on who you are, because if you don't own your brand, others will define your brand. And oftentimes it's not the brand you want to be defined as. So in terms of learning, I've seen over time where if I lose the microphone, then people don't know who I am. People don't know what my goals are. People don't know what I'm trying to achieve. And that's a bad narrative, because you got to be transparent. I always work with people trying to be open so that they know where I'm coming from, and I expect to know where they're coming from. If you don't have the microphone and people are making it up for you, then you're already starting in the wrong place. So, at Nike, we were able to use a lot of tools that are unusual, but my CFO at the time was like, hey, create a scorecard for tax. What's this scorecard? And it's everything sports related at Nike, right? So created a scorecard that talked about all the metrics, the goals, and how we were doing against them. And I used that not just to communicate to him, but to communicate to the team and any other stakeholders that wanted to understand tax. I talked before about being a translator. So making sure that you then design your communication tool so that you have a message to send and that you continue to own the microphone about your function, about what you're doing. Could be, in my case, all of tax. It could be in somebody who's running international, federal, state, transfer pricing, indirect tax, whatever you're doing, own it and own the messaging that you want to put out. I was in a thing the other day where they were doing a case study, and the case study was a glaring display of someone stepping into the job, not owning the narrative, and the narrative got written for them. The mistake they made was when they stepped into the job new, they never communicated, here's who I am, here's my goals, this is what I want to achieve. And they let other people design that for them or guess that. That was their first flaw, and it went downhill from there. So own your narrative, let people know who you are, and be transparent. And I think that you will go a long way within your career in doing that.
No, thank you. Yeah, completely agree. You've got to be you, and you've got to be true to yourself throughout. And you've got to stand up for yourself if something's happening that you don't necessarily agree with. As long as you're communicating correctly, you still need to keep it true to yourself. So thank you, Wayne. Sandia,
I think
hopefully we've left something for you.
there's always something, right? So what I would say is everyone's not going to embrace change. Change management is difficult. There's going to be a lot of resistance. There's going to be a lot of pressure, whether it's monetary pressures or just the team not engaging or not being able to engage your non-tax colleagues, not getting buy-in from management. It's going to come at you from many different angles. What I have realized, so I started 2 months after I started at this large public company, multinational, they announced their second restatement of the same years. So obviously heads rolled. It was where we went through 14 months of a restatement effort. But actually that was a great experience because what happened is almost everybody was new. No one had a sense of ownership to, well, this is the way I did it. There was no defensiveness. There was a collective view of how do we get out of this? How do we make this better? How do we look at what didn't go well? And how do we make it better? You had the audit firm. It was the same audit firm that signed off on those years twice, but it became my data, my information. I had to own it. So, do you own what you do? And, similar to what Wayne was talking about, the brand. What is your brand as a manager, as a team member, and how do you define it? Are you going to, are you going to stay on the straight and narrow, or are you going to say, here's broadly, how am I enabling the business to conduct business in a manner that is tax efficient, tax compliant, and proactive, right? I mean, that's kind of where, but getting to that point of mindfulness is quite difficult. And a lot of times, unless you have the bad experience that helps you kind of see the light, it's not always the given that you're going to be able to be that person, but you can. I mean, it's a matter of how, again, you approach every situation. And what I would say is that experience of a restatement was awesome. And we're all still friends to this date because of the sense of accomplishment that you get out of a bad experience. So don't look at something, yes, the hours were crazy, it kills you, but you're still here. So there's the victory in that.
Yeah, I think that's a really key kind of the whole all the three of the messages there are kind of key messages in their own right. But you bring them all in collectively, and it's for those that are watching and hopefully those that watch when we release this afterwards, it's a really good learning point that hopefully someone who's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years into their career can look at this and go, I need to go on that for Patrick and Wayne, I need to go on that run once a week or whatever it is for, your own self-care and looking after it and just getting out and then owning it and owning the work. And I think that kind of what you just said, Sandia, kind of ties nicely into, what's the biggest strength for yourself that you feel has elevated you above maybe your peers and elevated you throughout your career?
I mean, I think I kind of alluded to it, but it is the openness to change. It's the understanding of a lot of times the way you do something is not necessarily the way you should continue to do it. I'm big into tax technology. My friends who know me well, they're like, well, you're not a technologist. How are you into tax technology? My view there is, everything doesn't have to be difficult. Everything isn't necessarily easier. Technology doesn't make it easier. You have to understand your process and where the opportunities are. But the point is, are we lifting ourselves and elevating ourselves, focusing on the issues that are of importance to the company? Whenever I would go to IT or to ask for spend, their point was, what's the ROI? Well, with tax, a lot of times it's very difficult You don't have an ROI metric that you can point to. Well, it's avoidance of risk. Your ROI is everything right there. Instead of paying this, we can be paying that. So, it's hard to define, but 3 years later, if you're audited, guess what? The CFO is going to ask you, why didn't you say something? And it's very hard to be in a position to say, I did, but you didn't listen, right? That's not the answer. So it is your responsibility to keep pushing for what needs to change. Do we have the right team? Do we have the right mindset? Are we collectively working towards a response that works for the company? So, it's hard. It's a matter of pivoting, like Patrick said. It's a matter of being flexible. You stay true to yourself, but ultimately you're there at the company's pleasure. You have to make sure that there's alignment in your how you define what you want versus how the company thinks you should define it. So the alignment has to be there. But then ultimately, what pleasure are you gaining from being at that job at the end of each day? It doesn't matter. Sometimes long hours really don't matter if there's pleasure in it. But then, when you start managing people and all that, it becomes a little bit more sensitive because everyone may not have the same drive. The levels are going to be different. So.
Yeah, no, again, kind of touching back on one of the previous points that was made, not one shoe fits all, right? You've got to approach different individuals in different ways. And what you kind of stated ties quite nicely into what Wayne was saying before about owning yourself and owning your brand, and whether it's speaking to the CFO or whoever on the board saying that this is imperative because of X. There may not be an ROI that I can directly point to, but you're going to thank me in 3-4 years time, whenever that might
Or at least
be.
not kill me. You may not get the
Yes.
gratitude, but you won't get
Yeah, I'll start a job in 3-4 years time because I've asked that for that question. Thank you, Patrick. Same question. What's the kind of strength? And you've touched on a couple again throughout in terms of drive and motivation, and obviously that's strengths and weaknesses. But is there anything else that you can kind of touch to?
Yeah, well, I think so. A national level partner I've worked with for years, he kind of said it best, which is, I've got 50 clients. I can get fired by one client and I'm fine. You're an in-house person. You're an in-house guy. You've got one client, right? And so this is about managing an in-house career, right? People on this call are understand, how do I successfully navigate an in-house career? And you have to be very sensitive and resilient. You have to be able to pivot. If you're a bull in a china shop and you're not self-aware and you're not super open to feedback, you won't be successful. You will not move up through the ranks. And so it's the ability to, have that sensitivity to the way you come across and interact with others, your teammates, your boss, your business partners, outside consultants, right? And, your ability to very quickly pivot, identify when a pivot is needed and then execute. And, it's we're all tax technical people. That's a prerequisite, right? That's almost like, I hate to say it, that's almost like the commodity is being a tax technician. It's these other interpersonal skills, the sensitivity, the interpersonal ability to successfully navigate complex, nuanced interpersonal relationships and accept criticism, seek out criticism, and then quickly pivot. The ability to do those things, more than technical skill, more than anything else, has been what has allowed me to, move up and have a good career thus far.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think kind of technical skill, hopefully, knock on wood, is a given for most people. You'd like to think so if they're an expertise in salt or fed or whatever. You'd like to think that's a given. The soft skills is certainly what makes or break. I mean, you're all hiring managers, right? The soft skills are going to be what is important.
Right. And just to add one other point, it's not perfection, right? I guarantee you, I don't know if I have people watching this and go, oh, that guy, oh man, bull in a china shop. And sometimes I'm sure I am, but I'm also very quick to realize when I've gone too far, when I need to backtrack, when I need to, navigate. So, it's not like perfect. You're not going to have perfect, even within a company, you're not going to have perfect relationships, but you still need to be very sensitive and able to pivot.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you, Wayne. Last again, but not least, and then we're going to go into the Q&A section.
It's fine. I'm going to double down on that, on what Patrick said, though. But from a different perspective, it's about being a people leader. And I learned early on, I think I was an associate in public accounting, and I was getting a review from the senior associate or the manager. And something they said to me was, Wayne, when you're a manager, when you start to manage people, always remember what it felt like on that side of the table. And I've always tried to manage people from their seat and having that empathy. And I think that is what has guided me through my career, right? The question is, what do you feel has strengthened you or separated you? I think it's my approach to leadership has been about people. When I left Nike, brought the team around and announced I was leaving, and somebody came into the office after and said, Wayne, we know it's work and it's business, but you always made it personal. And while some people might not want the personal as part of work, that's for me what I've done. And there could be no better compliment about your career and your leadership than someone saying that. We just had I was saying earlier before we started, we had our global all staff for Visa yesterday, and we were transitioning to a new CEO, and we were congratulating the old CEO on his retirement. He's become executive chairman, and they did a monologue of his accomplishments, and nobody talked about EPS and the growth of the company and the value that he brought in his seat. They talked about his leadership and how he touched people, how he led with care, with empathy, with compassion for those on the team. And when you start thinking about what differentiates yourself in your career, it's what legacy do you want to leave? When I was at Nike, the tax rate went down every year for 10 years. I don't know what it's done since, and I'm sure it's continued to go down. I'm not saying pining on who's doing what, but it went down. At TransUnion, it went down. At Visa, it's gone down. When I retire, nobody's going to talk about the ETR went down. If they talk about how I led as a person, how I had empathy, how I cared about their growth and development, that's the legacy I want to leave behind. So I think that's voted well for me in being a leader. We did a panel at TEI annual conference or last year's mid-year, and we closed out, and I was urging my fellow tax leaders to not just be tax leaders or leaders of a function, but we have to, in this new environment, be people leaders. We're delivering a function, yes, but the biggest thing is caring about the people and their growth and their development. So I think if we focus on that, then that's going to differentiate our hopefully in the long term, all managers become like this and it doesn't differentiate. But right now, that's what's carried me through my career.
No, for sure. And I think all of you kind of at different points throughout the call have touched on the importance of having a great mentor and building those external relationships across the board. And I think that is something that potentially has the potential to kind of go under the radar more than it should do. Everyone sat on this call right now has mentors and people they go to for advice. And I think that is something that cannot be stated enough as an importance to also help you throughout your career. And you don't want to burn bridges through that.
Yeah, Jack, on that point, I agree. And I've been just so fortunate to have a mentor who supported me. But that's half the battle. And I try and mentor a number of people. And sometimes I see people like, yeah, I love the mentorship and let's create a path and and they don't act on it. They don't, if you have someone that might kind of sort of be interested in being a mentor, you got to meet them 60, 70%. You got to look at that opportunity and grab it and just go crazy. And some people are too lackadaisical. They have opportunities for mentorship, but they don't do their part to, really bring it when they have those opportunities. So I would say to those out there on this call, having a mentor, someone who might be a mentor, is a gift from heaven, and it will pay the biggest dividends in your career you can imagine. But you can't just sit back there and go, I got a mentor. Great. I can talk to him once a month. You have to actively seek ways to do your part as a mentee.
You've got to bring your side of it as well. And Wayne, you spoke about going over to England and first getting involved with the TEI and whatnot that came, and the advantages that came from that in terms of the international kind of scope. We're a little bit ahead of time in terms of the Q&A section. Do you want to talk for a couple of minutes around, continuing you're the president, around the TEI and how that has helped you in your career for a couple of minutes for those that don't know about it?
Sure. The first thing let me close Patrick's point. When I was appointed head of tax at Nike, I remember it's a big campus. So I was walking from my boss's office, my new boss's office, back to mine, and was thinking, you got a lot of people to go call and thank. And throughout my career, I never really thought about I had a mentor. And then I was like, wow, you got a lot of people to go call and thank. And I got on the phone that afternoon and I called a lot of people. And so that's guided me now. My door virtually is always open. If somebody wants some guidance and mentorship, I'm always happy to do it. So remember, that is part of your career. So I want to double down on that. TEI, I started in public accounting, and you get removed when you go into in-house. You sometimes can get removed from the industry. You just focus on the company and that little box. And I felt like, well, I don't know what's going on. And I happened to move to Europe, and I found TEI, and there was a bunch of us all doing those jobs as contributors leading the function for Europe. And we'd all travel each week and join TEI, and we'd get together every quarter and talk about what's been going on. I joined TEI's International Tax Committee. It helped me get the technical chops on international. So we've talked about technical skill is the foundation of success. So it helped me there. It helped me network. I got into leadership. I was on the board of TEI, and the opportunity at Nike doesn't come if the recruiter doesn't reach out to some TEI leaders and say, hey, I have this opportunity. Is there anybody you would recommend? 2 former presidents of TEI recommended me to that recruiter. That introduced me to Nike, and I ended up after some period of dancing and interviewing and figuring out the right role, I ended up at Nike. When I ended up at TransUnion, it was through recommendation of a TEI executive, and then that kind of led to where I am today. So the networking has helped. The education helps from a technical standpoint. And I just had a conversation with my controversy person yesterday. We're having some struggles with the IRS. I said, well, let's use some contacts in TEI to see if we can talk to some leadership to break this logjam, because what's going on isn't working well. And so use TEI to actually do some advocacy and connections to get things done for your company. There's value in a lot of things you do. So I would recommend, as a tax professional, TEI is certainly there for you to help grow. There are other organizations, I'm not going to say they're not, but I personally feel that TEI has helped me along the way.
Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes left now, so we're going to kind of jump into the few questions that we've got come through. First one, and feel free to answer in anyone, doesn't matter. Do you think there's ever a good career move to pivot within different tax functions? The question is it an example of going from tax compliance to tax technology? If yes, how is the best approach? Sandy, you might be the best one to talk about this, the tax tech piece, considering you're so kind of passionate about it.
Yeah, so for sure. In fact, that was one of the things I meant to cover. When you are younger in your career, I would say seek every challenge you can get. Try something new. It's okay if it doesn't work out. You can always go in a different direction. try something new, because if you want that leadership role, if you want that growth, you have to have touched on different areas. You don't have to be the subject matter expert. As a leader, what you do is you pull in people who are stronger than you in different areas, because it's about the team. It's not about yourself. So, gain that experience, because it is very important for us to understand tax, not just from our straight and narrow, but broadly, because even if you continue to be an individual contributor throughout your career, what you want to make sure is you understand the questions to ask of other areas. And, so without a doubt, do that. I repurposed a position at one of my companies to a tax technology role, hired someone in. Best decision I made, because, we don't have time as individuals to do something better in a different way. Bring someone in who can partner with you and affect that change, because then that helps all of us rise to a different level. So definitely try it out. I never took on the opportunity to work overseas. I wish I had. And so, you don't want to go through your career with regrets. So try it and then move differently if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, as clearly someone who's moved over from the UK to the US, it's been great for my career. Obviously slightly different to tax. I recruit for it, but Patrick and Wayne can obviously attest to the value that international moves can happen. And
I think you just always have to take advantage of the opportunities to grow. I talked about this in my journey. I've done audit, I've done corporate tax, I did individual tax and personal financial planning, then went state tax, federal tax. And then at some point, I never thought of myself as an international tax person. And next thing you know, I was an international tax person. I don't know how that came, but for the last 20 years, I've been international tax. But I think as you go, get as much as you can. I've always thought of myself as a tax generalist, not a specialist in any particular area. But I think if you get as much background as you can, then you're that much more marketable and thought of as a leader, because you can lead in any space.
So I would say I broadly agree with the comments here, but so I would add two things to think about. So the first is, I'm not a fan of doing things just to say I did it and check off the box. I'm not saying anyone has suggested that, but for this person, this question, hey, I've got 8 years, I've got experience. Should I do this to further my career? And I think the key is, do you have a passion for it? Are you interested in it? So that's the first thing. I wouldn't do it just to check it off so that you've got another thing on your resume. It's like, do it if you're passionate about it. The second is, will it be good for my career or not? Who freaking knows? Like, what do you want from your career? Like, do you want to move into planning? If you want to move into planning, probably investing a few years of your life into tax technology might not pay the biggest return on investment. So I think, like for me, and for a lot of us here, we've bounced around a lot, and there's pros of bouncing around a lot. There's real pros of it. You have that breadth, and it can be extremely valuable, especially as you move up. But there's a cost to it as well, and you lose that expertise, that dedicated expertise. And so with each move, I think, there's pros, and you should be open and take risks in your career. But I do think that there are costs too. Like I was well positioned for a head of tax job because I had that breadth. I wasn't well positioned for a head of transfer pricing or a head of just planning or a head of M&A because I didn't have enough dedicated experience for those specific roles. So I think it's a balancing out, a need to take some risk and just to be thoughtful about what you have in mind for your mid to long-term career.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. You need to think about where you want to be. If you want to, as you said, if you want to be ahead of tax, you probably do need to be a bit more of an all-rounder in terms of exposure than a head of international or head of planning or whatever. Thank you. Obviously, the next question is around diversity and inclusion at the kind of head of tax level. Has anyone got any comments with regards to that space?
Sure. I think the head of tax, we need people in the industry. We need diversity in the industry. It has to start somewhere. So we're not going to see it at head of tax roles because there's not a lot of diverse talent coming up in the experience ranks. So it's a long-term play. We have to get out and those who have diverse qualities or things that's underrepresented in the tax field. We got to get people that look like us to see that they can have a career here and that it's worthwhile. And so I encourage people to get out and mentor those high school and college students that are interested in accounting, interested in law, and let them see this career. We got to do better there. And then with regard to identifying talent for heads of tax, you got to continue to force the talent pool to include diverse talent in that. They'll often say they're not out there, but they are. And there's a group of us who are heads of tax that have come together, as Black heads of tax, so we can kind of see that community. And it was interesting. It took us all these time, and it's just in the last year we've gotten together to do it, because it just never existed, because we never really thought about it that way. And now we're doing it. So they're there. You got to force people to identify them when you're interviewing, but continue to push for it. But we got to do the long play and get more people in the profession.
Yeah, for sure. It's not going to be a 2-year fix or a 2-year solution or however you want to kind of say. Next one is coming from a transfer pricing professional surrounding CPA not having one. Is it better to spend time devoted to technology or CPA in the transfer pricing space? We've got a couple more minutes, probably a couple more questions, but anyone want to comment on that?
I can comment on that, because a lot of times, as tax professionals, whether we're first starting out or later in our career, sometimes we can look at form versus substance, play on words there for tax people who get the joke. And to Patrick's point, do what works for you. But what I would say is, again, CPA, yes, a lot of companies will look for you to have a CPA designation, and then you continue to keep it. But to me, it's an exam. You pass it, and then you never have to take it again. So what does it mean for you? Do you want to do your PhD? That I see a lot of economists in the transfer price area who are PhDs. So what drives your boat? And then pursue it in that manner. You're going to get knocked down. You're not going to always get every opportunity that you would like to get. So you have to kind of stick with it and persevere. And, a quick point about diversity, Jack, it comes in many different ways, right? You are going to get resistance sometimes. I once had a partner in public accounting tell me he wanted to call me Mrs. E because my last name was too long. And I said, if I can call you Mr. T, it did not go over well. But you know what? I mean, stand up for yourself. So it takes strength sometimes. Yeah. Do what works for you and be prepared to face the consequence of that. Back in the day, you had to be a CPA. Now I don't necessarily look for that as an automatic checklist point.
I would just add, I think that's right. I think some of the most talented people I've ever worked with, weren't CPAs and didn't go to pedigree schools. And so I think there should be still opportunity. And then, the question here is, 3-4 years for a CPA. I did 4 years of night law school. I wrote 4 years of my life gone. And I like to joke that I had a full head of hair before I started night law school, but I did it because I wanted to do it. I had a passion for it. I knew that was going to supplement my career. And, it was hard and difficult, but it was as much a labor of just passion and love and wanting to improve myself. So, don't do these things just to do them because you're interested in it. And you're guaranteed a return on investment if you do it that way, rather than just, I kind of sort of think this might theoretically be good for my career.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've got time for one more quick question. I'm going to point to one that Wayne and Sandia, we had a quick conversation. I say quick, it was about an hour and a half, wasn't it, on remote hybrids policy and how that all works. Wayne, I know you personally, you've got pretty strong views on maybe strong is the wrong word, but you've got set views, I guess, on how it should work. What's your opinion on kind of the hybrid remote model?
I think the nature of the question was a mid-level tax executive. I think some of the things we talked about in terms of leadership are learned through observation. Relationships are built through being together. And so I think while we've proven in the last 2.5, 3 years that remote work can get it done, it's not always about just getting it done. It's about what relationships you develop, who you can go grab a cup of coffee with, who you can have lunch with. How do you observe leadership behavior in action? And I think, and I talked about relationships that I had that helped me get other opportunities. So being live, being in person has value. And it's not about the value of, oh, we're going to have a team event, we're going to do a training together. It's about just personal interaction. And so I think that that's important. We can find hybrid models that allow some remote work and some in person, but completely remote is just basically, then you have a job, not a career.
Yeah, no, I agree with that one. Thank you, everyone who has joined and been with us through this. Thank you for the panelists, obviously, for taking time out of your day. It was nice to see you all. I'm sure I'll be speaking with you all individually at some point soon. Apologies that we didn't get to quite a few of the questions that have come through. If anyone does want to have a conversation, have a chat, feel free to reach out.
If you all want to capture
definitely,
some questions, I'm happy. I'm sure the panelists happy to weigh in with answers in any particular way.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Same here.
So
Thank you and all the best to the participants.
Yes, definitely. We will be sending out the recording. I think it's going up on YouTube somewhere, and kind of on LinkedIn. There'll be snippets posted throughout. So hopefully you've all enjoyed it. Thank you again, and have a lovely rest of the Thursday, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Take care.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.